Hi, I'm Geeta Sehgal, and a member of Women Against Fundamentalism, and I really appreciated the comments from all the panelists. I want to just address a couple of things, a slight expansion of some of the things that were said about Tower Hamlets. I agree that the election of the mayor, who is a member of the Islamic Forum Europe, which was set up among others by somebody with very serious allegations of war crimes against them, and who has been active in the Jamaat-e-Islami, which, as I think most people in the audience know, is a fundamentalist and very violent political party across South Asia and very active in Britain now. That election of the mayor is a disaster, but it was an election where the Labour Party completely messed it up. I don't know why, I don't know the reasons for that, but a very small turnout of the electorate happened. And there in Tower Hamlets, there's a very active secular Bangladeshi community, not identified solely as Muslims. I mean, some of them are not Muslims, and there are Muslims within it who don't necessarily identify politically as Muslims, who have been active for years on secular issues and accountability for war crimes, and who also mobilized, and much wider Labour Party mobilized, to elect a secular Bangladeshi woman, Roshanara Ali, as the MP in Tower Hamlets. And that was a huge victory, because every candidate was of Bengali Muslim descent, including an imam that the Liberal Democrats had put up, because every candidate is playing this kind of, every party is playing this kind of politics. But when the people of Tower Hamlets, who included Bangladeshis and Somalis and indigenous white working class people, went out to vote in large numbers, they voted for a secular woman. And I think that's highly significant. And it was regarded as a great victory for Bangladeshis in that area. So I think that, some good signs along with all the other. But the question I wanted to put to the panel, because this is something that worries me a lot, is that I want to dissent a little bit from what people have been saying about needing an enlightenment. I think that one of the reasons that the Jamaat-e-Islami and the Muslim Brotherhood, active in Britain with the kind of Saudi and other powerful backing that you're talking about, and also Iranian organizations active in this country, Iranian-backed organizations active in this country, one of the reasons that they're being supported by the politicians is precisely because they see them as the Muslim reformists. Because they've learned to talk the language of democracy and secularism, even secularism sometimes, not so much in Britain, but in India, you'll find Muslim fundamentalists saying the secular state protects us. So we have to be very cautious about this, because it's precisely that language of Muslim reform which is similar to extreme Protestantism of, I don't know, the 17th century. Which destroyed the churches, stopped singing, stopped theater, did all sorts of things. But it's not allied to a political movement that is promoting the separation of church and state, which was what the Enlightenment also did. And I think that's the danger, because what you pointed out is that the politics of these so-called, and they are reformers, because they're actually very anti-traditional Muslim practices. They are reformers, and they have learned to speak certain languages in order to pursue ends, both peacefully, but towards ultimately violent purposes, like the apostasy laws that you talked about. And they're doing it through attacking not just the examples that you mentioned, Bahram, of people being murdered. I didn't know of that particular instance in 87 that you talked about in Iran, where prisoners, even at the end of their sentences, are killed. But through, for instance, attacking people who are seen eating during Ramzan, who are just doing things that would have been considered perfectly normal a generation ago, or would have been considered somebody's private decision, whether they pray, or how many times they pray, or whether they eat during a fasting period and so on. And suddenly it becomes something that's absolutely impermissible, and that you can, in Algeria, for instance, I think people were put in jail for that. And in Britain, you won't be put in jail yet, but there's increasing deference to that kind of religious practice as a way of establishing it as an absolute norm that people have to follow. And there's a continuum between apostasy laws and that. And I think finally, I just wanted to ask a question, which is that at the UN, when I was at Amnesty International, And I work with Marieme in a coalition called the Women Human Rights Defenders Coalition. And with a great deal of struggle, we managed to make a statement on the defamation of religions, because it was the human rights organizations that were very, very reluctant to comment on it, whereas the women's rights organizations were more, happier to comment on it. And in fact, it was Marieme who alerted us to the fact that this was going on, in spite of the fact that Amnesty has 10 people monitoring the UN in New York and Geneva and so on, or more actually, some in London as well. And yet they weren't working on these issues. And we had to try and push them to begin to, and I don't know if they've got any better or since then. But also, sorry, I'm winding to a close. The question that I wanted to ask is that, are you able to get the support of some of the movements working on sexuality issues and women's rights? Because again, what we found is that when it's religion, they're very reluctant to comment. It's only specific language. For instance, the recent scandal about sexual orientation being removed as language from a protection of people for their sexual orientation being removed from a particular resolution, then they mobilize. But if it's actually on the issue of apostasy or issues about defamation and so on, the links aren't sufficiently made, and people are only concerned with protecting their own identity and not actually seeing that these other things are a greater threat. So I just wondered what your comments were on that.
I think Mina is keen.
Ja.
And
Ich möchte über Reform etwas kurz sprechen. Reform im Islam.
I wanted to briefly talk about reform in Islam.
Die erste Sache ist, dass, wenn wir über Reform sprechen, zum Beispiel, ist es möglich, Koran etwas anderes schreiben oder einen Satz von Koran weglöschen? Ist das jetzt möglich?
First of all, I wanted to say, is it possible that when we talk about reform that we change the Quran, that for example we leave one sentence out from the Quran?
Ich wurde schon gefragt, wenn ich möchte Koran reformisieren, dann möchte ich 90% von Koran weglassen und nur 10%. Ist das möglich?
If they were asked me if I wanted to reform the Quran, I would get rid of 90% of the Quran and would just leave in 10%. Is that possible?
Aber wir leben jetzt in einer Welt mit einer sehr großen islamischen Bewegung, islamische Regierungen. Man darf nicht Koran tasten. Man muss zuerst die Hände waschen und dann Koran tasten.
But now we live in a time where we have a lot of Islamic power with some big Islamic governments, and you can't even touch the Quran. You have to wash your hands before you touch it.
Dann das ist nicht möglich jetzt. Dann gehen wir in Alltag leben. Ist das möglich, zum Beispiel islamische Regime im Iran reformisieren? Wir haben das gehört, Khatami ist Reformist zum Beispiel.
So that's not possible. So now we're going into the daily life. So for example, in Iran, we had Khatami who wanted to reform.
Ich bin Vorsitzende einer Komitee gegen Steinigung und als Khatami Macht gehabt hat, haben mehr als 50 Frauen und Männer gesteinigt.
I'm the spokesperson for the Committee Against Stoning, and when Khatami was in power, they stoned to death more than 50 men and women.
Ich denke, in islamischer Bewegung spielen verschiedene Organisationen mit verschiedenen Karten.
I think in the Islamic organizations, or in the Islamic movement, there are different organizations that play different cards.
Zum Beispiel in Deutschland, es gibt eine Organisation Milli Görüş, das ist total radikal und jetzt ist schon wegen Geldwäsche und alles unter Beobachtung von Polizei. Es gibt auch DITIB, die Männer kommen mit Krawatte und Samsonet und Laptop und sprechen über Islam.
For example, in Germany we have an Islamic organization, Milli Görüş. They are under police investigation now because of embezzlement of funds. And then we have the DTIB, and their representatives, they come in suit and ties, and they have a very nice representation.
Wir haben in sogenannten islamischen Ländern Frauen, die versuchen mit Mullahs reden und erklären bitte ein bisschen Recht, ein bisschen Frauenrechte zum Beispiel.
In some Islamic countries we have women that are trying to talk to the mullahs and they're saying, please, can we have some human rights, a bit of rights?
Das haben nie geschafft, etwas ändern.
They never managed to change anything.
Deswegen, das ist ein politischer Kampf auf meine Sicht. Wenn wir islamische Bewegung, wenn wir zum Beispiel islamische Regime im Iran abschaffen, dann Reform fängt an.
This is a political fight, in my opinion. If, for example, in Iran we get rid of the Islamic regime, then the reform can start.
Für mich, ich habe kein Interesse, Islam reformisieren. Ich habe Interesse, diese politische Movement in eine direkte Kampf erniedrigen und also fertig kriegen, auf politisch gesagt. Und deswegen, ich denke, das ist eine politische Issue, wenn man auch über Reform redet.
I'm not interested in reforming. I want to get rid of the Islamic movement in a fight.
Weil mein Problem ist mit Frauenrechte, Menschenrechte, Säkularismus. Und auf diesen Punkt, wenn man anfängt, dann man muss mit diesen Bewegungen kämpfen.
Because my issues are human rights, women's rights, and if you start from there, you have to fight with this movement.